Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HealthyXSundays podcast, where we bring you the most critical and actionable content in the nutrition and fitness space. Dave from Mind Muscle Pro and I, Kunal Jain, also known as Veg Diet Coach, are your hosts. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Sandeep Garg from Portland, Oregon. He's been a cardiologist for over 3 decades, and he shares a lot of truth about heart diseases and the myths surrounding them through his beautiful newsletter. We'll be discussing diseases like metabolic syndrome and other conditions prevalent today. It's a great pleasure and honor to have him with us on the podcast. With that, we like to welcome you, Dr. Garg.
Thank you so much, Kunal and Dave, for inviting me. I think it's a huge opportunity and giving me opportunity to make a bigger impact on a lot of people that I can help with. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So let's get started. What inspired you to become a cardiologist? What's your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in India, actually, Punjab, and I lost my mom when I was 13-year-old. And that was obviously, as you can understand, a huge impact on me and my siblings. My siblings were even younger than me. And I think that pushed me a lot to get into medicine. And I kind of meandered my way to doing cardiology. Mostly, I think cardiology, as you know, heart disease is the number one killer, not only in the United States, pretty much everywhere in the world, developed countries. And I know when I was in med school, like several decades ago, heart disease was practically non-existent on the in the eastern seaboard, China and Japan and whatnot. And I think has slowly become even the number one killer in those countries as well as we industrialized, as we brought Americanized diet and lifestyle to other countries. And I think for me, that was the biggest push to become a cardiologist. And I started practicing roughly about 30 years ago. And obviously, in the first 10 years, just being a good soldier, I pretty much practiced the way standard of care is. And after about a decade or so, something in my click that things don't line up because we spend so much in the United States, about $4 to $5 trillion per year on healthcare. And I just see people sick. And it just clicked in me that I'm not really providing healthcare. I'm just putting band-aids and really expensive ones on people and just helping them, people with heart attacks, saving their lives, sudden cardiac death and whatnot. But the people are getting stents and bypass surgeries after 5 years, after 7 years, after 10 years. And as if I'm putting fighting the wildfire with a water hose, you're
Right.
never going to win that. You got to get to the source of the problem. And about 2 decades ago, I started exploring more and more into it. And I think last 2 decades, I've been focusing a lot more on teaching my patients, talking to my patients about diet, about connectivity of different risk factors. And I learned a lot in the last 2 decades that I probably didn't learn in medical school or residency in my cardiology training. It's been a very enjoyable ride for me to make impact. I've seen people reversing their diabetes, coming off medications, reversing high blood pressure and weight. And to me, that's why I went into med school. And I think last 20 years have been much more impactful in my life as well, reaching my goal. And what made me more getting into beyond that has been really how I can take this beyond my doctor patient room to other people. Because by the time people seeing me, they're already sick. They already have diabetes, they already have heart disease, they already have their heart attack, they have atrial fibrillation and whatnot. So I want to get to middle age and younger population who are not in my office to see me, and they're not in the hospital or in the emergency room to see me. And that made me kind of get on social media and see how I can make impact on other people.
Uh, that's beautiful to hear, Doctor. So, what made you realize
Thank you.
that yeah, what made you realize a tsunami of sickness is coming our way? What trends have you
I think it's
observed?
yeah, absolutely. I think few of the things is just the statistical data and just personal observation also. And the classic thing I joke around with my patients, I tell them, I watched the videos of the JFK assassination in 1963. And you don't see a single obese person running around. I look at the airports now or any public place now. It go to any airport all over the world. It's just sad what you see. What I see in the office, what I see in the hospital. And then you look at the hard data, statistically speaking. If you go on a CDC website, you see the obesity trends in the United States. Just in 1980, Colorado was the most, no, I mean, I'm not, so not Colorado. Colorado has always been the healthiest. But even the obesity rates in the US were around 10% just 4 decades ago. And
Right.
now we're touching 30%. It's projected in another decade, it's going to be 50% plus obesity. If you look at the trends in India or any in China, India is the third obese nation in the world. China is number two. And you see so many young people in their 40s and 50s, and I call them that you're on the launch pad. You don't have heart disease yet. It's just like you're sitting on a railroad track waiting for the train to hit you. And that's how healthcare and medicine is being practiced. And I see tons of people. I may see somebody for a simple problem, abnormal EKG, and then you see they have pre-diabetes, nobody knows about it. Patient does not know anything about it. Their triglycerides are 300, their HDL, their glucose is high. And I feel like there is so much population out there. It's like a funnel feeding the heart disease. And I always tell patients that, heart disease to me is sort of the destination and all ends up there. The rest of the stuff, it's just the process, it's the journey, whether it's diabetes, whether it's smoking, whether it's obesity. You go to grocery stores, you see people buying supplements, and in the same shopping cart, they have junk food, they have all the stuff. And I'm just, as a cardiologist, looking at it, and I'm crying and laughing at the same time in my heart, like, what has gone wrong? So that's why I feel like there is a tsunami of sick people coming, and we don't even have enough doctors trained, at least in the United States. I don't know about in India. There's a huge shortage of physicians. And I don't even know how we're going to handle that, how we're going to even financially as a society pay for it. And the human suffering, it's just unsurmountable.
Absolutely. I think you've covered it beautifully. It's a grim situation and it's a tsunami of sickness, and we are not even ready for it. So I believe all this motivated you to start a newsletter online. Would you like to speak a little bit more about the newsletter?
Sure, absolutely. What made me start new? I think it was about three. I've been thinking about it for a few years. I just, you get so busy, and finally, I pulled the trigger about 3 to 4 months ago. I've been writing newsletters. Mostly started with talking about different heart disease in a simple term, so people understand what all that stuff means. I'm getting more into lifestyle, more talking about more. My most recent newsletters were mostly talking about fasting and what to avoid, what to eat, what not to do. And my goal, really, as I mentioned earlier, is how to make a bigger impact upstream in the funnel. Because if I can make impact on thousands and tens of thousands of people upstream, they'll have lesser diabetes, they'll have lesser pre-diabetes, and lesser problems with heart disease in the coming decades. And I think that was my goal. And so I'm doing newsletter recently. I'm also launching maybe one-on-one coaching, talking to people about being more specific with them depending on each individual situation. Because one of the things I see on X is people asking specific questions, and it's very difficult to answer that in detail because you don't know what their situation, what their
Absolutely.
motivations are, what their comorbidities are they on any pills or not. So, and my hope is that this journey will make me really do what I really wanted to do, help people.
Right. For the next section, Dave, you want to take?
Yeah. So, doctor, how does your approach to heart health differ from a traditional medical teachings?
As I was alluding to earlier, I think medical teaching, the problem with medical teaching I see is that we spend so many decades to become a specialist in something. You're in your mid 30s to late 30s before you even step out in the real world and start working on what you've been, invested so much time in. I think a lot of focus is on pills and procedures. And I find it hard to believe this is all intentional. Maybe that's my innocence, but I do think that there is very, very minimal focus on prevention. I see there are like, four major stakeholders beyond the public and the population and the patients, whether it's the uh, policymakers, government level, whether you look at the hospitals and providers and healthcare professionals, you look at the food industry, You look at the pharmaceutical industries. And if you really deep down you look, as I always say, healthy people do not make money for any industry. Sick people do. And lot of focus in education for the physicians, for the medical students is really about physiology and biochemistry and pills and procedures. And we all do a very good job. And I think they're very, very satisfying as well. I mean, you save somebody's life at this state, you feel good about it yourself. But at the end of the day, 10 years down the line, I don't know how much impact you make. Our reimbursement system is set up to do more, not to do less. You see commercials, you see advertisements on television, the Olympics, and you see all these big events, sporting events. They may have nothing to do with junk food, but that's what's promoted. You look at the clinical trials, it's the same thing, sponsored by industry, pharmaceutical industries doing the clinical trials, same few high institutions, they're all promoting the same thing. And when it comes down to the patients, the major stakeholders, patients and population, they're kind of confused because there is so much conflicting information. LDL is bad, LDL is good, meat is bad, meat is good, saturated fat, unsaturated fat, supplements, omega-3 fatty acids. So we live in an information age. The information is good. The problem is that it's very difficult for people to parse out the noise from the signal. And that is a huge challenge. And so prevention is sort of the hard way to do things, and nobody wants to do it. There is no promotion. There is no promotion from those four industries, and then people don't want to do it either because it's really tough. It's really tough, and the ones who really want to do it, they're confused because they get so much data thrown at them. They just don't know what the right thing to do is. So I think that has changed my approach in the last 2 decades. I've been spending more time talking to patients about other stuff beyond just pills. And when I give some talks, I'll see many times primary care questions. They usually ask me something. Hey, this guy's cholesterol is this. Would you put them on Lipitor? And I'm just baffled by that because there is no discussion with the patient. The talking about diet or lifestyle does not even dawn on anybody because it's just sort of like a reflex. Blood pressure, this medicine, diabetes, this medicine, cholesterol, this medicine. And you see repeatedly patients, you ask them, has anybody ever talked to you about diet? Absolutely not. And so I have changed my approach in the last 2 decades, seen huge results. As I mentioned earlier, people, coming off diabetic medication. So they were on 10 pills, now maybe they're taking one or none or two, losing weight. And to me, that is so much more meaningful than any stents or any pacemakers you do.
Right. The speech by RFK Jr. the other day must have made you very happy.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I was saying
Oh, RFK? Yeah.
yeah,
I
the
mean,
speech must have.
I was very impressed. I mean, I'm not much, fan of any politicians or whatnot, but that to me was very impressive. Is that I've not heard any politician bringing healthcare and sickness at the forefront. I thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that.
So coming to the next question, when patients come to you with cardiac issues, which blood markers do you typically see that are off?
So I think that very, very good question. I think there are a lot of blood markers, but I will go even step earlier. To me, beyond the blood markers, I think just looking at them and their physique is a big thing. As you know, obesity gets a lot of bad name. So there are three kind of fats, right? There is liver fat, and then there is visceral fat, and then there is subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat, we all know, that's the fat you can see. Somebody's 250, 300 pounds. It's easy to see. It's the visceral fat, the fat inside in the belly, and the liver fat is the big killer. My point is that before even doing any blood test, just looking at a patient with a bigger abdomen, skinny legs, and skinny arms, they on surface may seem they are very healthy. To me, that is a huge red flag. And that alone is a huge thing. When you check the lipid panel, cholesterol check, LDL I know gets a lot of publicity, but triglycerides and HDL I think are much better, better predictor of heart disease than LDL alone. And we can talk about LDL if you choose to do later, but Triglycerides and HDL is a huge thing. Fasting blood glucose is a huge thing. Fasting insulin levels. Uh, I think these are like the basic bare minimum cheap tests. When I see a patient for who don't have heart disease yet, many times I go in the medical record and look if they ever had a liver ultrasound or if they had a CAT scan done for something else. And several times you find they have liver fat, they have coronary calcification, or they have calcification in other arteries. To me, right there, you already know they have atherosclerosis. When you put in the context of their family history, their lifestyle, their abdominal obesity, and triglycerides, HDL glucose, that just tells you the entire story. I see 30, 40-year-old taking two blood pressure medications. I ask them what they basically they have accepted taking two or three medications. I always try to promote to patients that you need to ask a question. You're in the prime of your life. You're in your 30s and 40s. Why are you taking pills? Why are you taking metformin for diabetes? So I think those things make a huge difference. Uh, Heart disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, at the end of the day, these are inflammatory diseases. So I think checking high sensitivity CRP levels in the right situation, I think that these are all to me are small signs. I don't think standalone one test is going to answer. It's sort of like you're solving a big piece of puzzle. One or two tests are not going to answer that. There's a lot of talk about ALT, which is liver enzymes being elevated. The problem with a lot of labs also is if you look at the norms are defined by two standard deviation above the median. But if the population is getting sicker and sicker, that median level is going up and up, and you raise the two standard deviation above, even your normal range is off. I remember on X the other day, somebody commented on, it sent that picture of their HDL triglycerides to HDL ratio. In India, they were using, I forgot, 3 or 4 as normal. And when I commented on less than 2 is optimally you want. And that's the entire problem. If you look at the lab slips, they're many times off. I see in the US all the time. The normal ranges are so wide and they are so skewed to the right side that people just compare that and they think that's normal. It's not. It's not because our whole curve has shifted to the right.
Fasting insulin, for instance, in India, typically in a lab, it's from 2 to 25.
Yeah,
So we say anything above 6 is a cause of concern. So it's hard for people
exactly,
to
exactly,
digest that.
exactly. And that's what I'm saying. So if your fasting insulin is in upper teens and 20s, you got a problem. And I think that's a huge thing. I think coronary calcium score has a role. The biggest problem I see with coronary calcium score is that people are just getting it without knowing what to do with the results. So I usually prep my patients beforehand why they need to do coronary calcium score, if they need to do it, and what's the incremental value of it, and how is that going to help them. If they're going to now become hypochondriac, lose their sleep, that may be not the best test. If they're very motivated, then obviously it's a great test to do. Maybe if that pushes them one way or the other. So there are a lot of good tests out there. Those are all warning signs. And I think it's a combination of all of them that guides you, not a single test that I think is end all be all.
All right. So moving to our next question, when an average person look at their basic lipid profile, like what should they focus on? Most people just focus on total cholesterol or just see the LDL numbers. Oh my God, LDL is so high, total cholesterol is too high. That's what most people look at. Like, what is the most important thing an average person who doesn't know anything regarding all this should look at?
Yeah, LDL gets the entire publicity for heart disease for the last several decades. And I don't think, and I've always said that for my entire as a doctor, my career to patients, LDL gets all the blame, but it is not just the LDL. If you take LDL in heart attack and plot it on an x-axis and y-axis, the lower to medium range LDL is all scattered. You can have LDL of 90 and no heart disease. You can have LDL of 90 and you have three vessel disease and requiring bypass surgery. So LDL is not a good marker unless I think LDL is very, very high, because you see people with familial hyperlipidemia where their LDLs are 190s, 200. I think definitely, no matter what people say, I think LDL does very high levels correlate with heart disease. lower to mid-level, I think it's all scattered. So to answer your question, what to look for on lipid panel, I almost never look at the total cholesterol. I think triglyceride HDL ratio, which I was alluded to earlier, is a much better predictor because that kind of shows you the underlying metabolic problem. That shows you that they have fatty liver, they have visceral obesity, they have insulin resistance, and they have atherogenic lipid profile. Their LDL is small dense LDL, so they're higher risk for getting heart disease. Because even if you look at statins, on average, statins lower your risk for heart attack by about 25 to 30%. And that's what I tell my patients. So that means this medicine will help you 30% of the time. 70% of people still have heart attacks on statins. We all know that for the last several decades, but we still talk about statins and LDL all day long. That's the number one thing. Anybody sees high cholesterol that goes in their mind is prescription of Lipitor or whichever favorite statin is. And I always comment on that. LDL is sort of like the bullet left at the crime scene. But the gun, the weapon, is the other stuff that we don't see. That's the inflammatory stuff, the triglycerides, that HDL and local inflammation and causing plaque formation and plaque destruction and heart attack. So to short way, I would say, to me, HDL triglyceride levels mean a lot more than LDL. But I do pay attention to LDL as well. Again, depending on the circumstances. Somebody is for primary prevention who never had a heart disease versus somebody who already has atherosclerosis.
So suppose it is very, very common for people on a low carb diet to have an elevated LDL. Some people are even hyper-responders. So as long as, but we see all the other markers are within range, are optimal. So in that case, do you think LDL is much of a concern under a low carb ketogenic diet?
Again, it will depend on their rest of the cardiovascular risk factors, right? That's sort of something I do not buy into narrative of taking a bipolar opinion, very strong against LDL or very strong with LDL. So to me, it will depend on many other factors. For example, if the individual you're mentioning, the triglycerides and HDL may be fine, but they have diabetes or they have something else, or they have family history. 4 of their siblings had heart disease in 30s and 40s, or they smoke. So I think I'll put all that in context. And to me, if there is a question, you can always consider doing a coronary calcium score to guide you one way or the other. Is this LDL causing a problem or not? Or this person already has a heart disease, then we're talking something different. So I think your question is a very good one. And I think that's what causes a lot of confusion. But I think you have to look at the entire picture, not at one lab, to make a strong opinion, in my opinion.
So since you mentioned about CAC, how should everyone above the age of 40 get it, and how often should they get it?
So coronary calcium score, when I get this question asked by my patients, I usually tell them, to me, doing coronary calcium score is a decision to buy a treadmill. Okay, a simple analogy. I tell them I see there are 3 kind of people. One, who exercise, get up at 5 or 6 in the morning and go running. And that person does not need a treadmill because they're already committed that I'm doing the right thing. So if I'm one of those people, everything is in tip-top shape. I do take care of myself, eat healthy, exercise. Do you need to do coronary calcium score? Maybe not, unless you think it's going to motivate you at the next level. Then there's the other extreme, people who are not going to change regardless. So if they're not going to use the treadmill, they're sitting in the garage, maybe you don't need a coronary calcium score. So it's the middle population who say, I'm very busy, I want to run, but if I have a treadmill in the garage, it will really motivate me to do it. Then I think it's probably the best thing to do. But knowing some limitations from coronary calcium score, just tells you have calcification in the plaque, so you can see subclinical disease. But it does not predict, it cannot look at soft plaque or non-calcific plaque. When we look at the plaque buildup, it starts as a non-calcific plaque for years before it becomes calcification. So younger patients, younger you are, coronary calcium score has lesser sensitivity. It does not mean I'll pick it up because you can still have non-calcific plaque and miss it. So I'm very specific I talk to people before I ask them, just willy-nilly go get a coronary calcium score. And then you ask how often. Usually I tell people if you had it one and you already have calcification, and if it's positive, doing it again is not going to add any incremental value. You already know you have heart disease. Whether it's score of 500 this time, 5 years later, 750, doesn't matter. You already know you have underlying subclinical disease. You need to spend more energy and more time on doing the right thing, not in testing. I see many times people get lost in doing more and more and more tests. And I think that is another side effect of extreme concern. And I think the fear is good, but fear, you got to channel it more towards taking action than just doing testing.
Kunal, so you can take it from here, but
So the
audience, you can leave your questions as well. We'll be answering them in the as we go along. So Kunal,
Yeah, I think the last point you made about going into too many tests, I think it's got a diminishing return at some after some point of time, and it's very expensive in America to get a lot of these tests. And at least it's very cheap in India, but I think it's very expensive over there as well.
Yeah, coronary calcium score, most of the insurances in the US don't pay for it. You have to pay out of pocket, but it's not, it's about 200 to maybe $300.
Okay,
Yeah, but I think if it's going to change somebody's life, as I said, if you're going to use the treadmill, then that's the best money you spend, no
right,
doubt. Yeah.
absolutely.
but it is very what from what I know working with clients in the US, what I understand is that it's not easy to get even a simple blood test. Here we can go to a lab, get the blood test done, but there you need the doctor's permission and doctors telling why do you need a fasting insulin test? Why do you need to do that? It's not relevant.
Yeah, that you're absolutely correct. And I think that is a huge gap. Very few physicians and practitioners in the US are proactive enough. They're doing stuff outside the box. Particularly, for example, you brought up fasting insulin levels. A lot of these tests, most of the traditional physicians don't order. I think the ones that order are functional medicine doctors or maybe some naturopath. But again, and I also see this pendulum swinging to the other side too. People are getting all these nonchalant tests that um, main supplements and this and that. I don't know if that has any impact. So I always feel like truth is always in the middle, not in the extremes. And I see that all the time. People going way too far extreme, getting every single blood test every 3 months, all these different levels of different elements and all this stuff. I think that's extreme as well, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Kunal.
Right. Talking about empowering individuals, why is it important for individuals to take care of their health, do their own research, and especially the food which they're consuming? Why should they be wary of that? So, what is your like your suggestions on the food intake, etc.?
Yeah, I think as I was saying earlier, the most of the industries out there, they are not going to come and solve the problem for you. And I already commented on four different: food industry, pharmaceutical, the policymakers, and the healthcare community. They're not going to come and be your saviors, in my opinion. And I say that the health and wealth is each individual's personal responsibility. The way I look at it is, if and I see the patients that who change their lifestyle are the ones who frankly look in my eyes and they own it. They say, I am going to do it. If people say, I'm going to try to do it, or my boss, my work, my wife, my son, stress, this and that, they're never going to do it. My point is that you got to own it, because once you own it, you become responsible for it yourself. You're not giving the responsibility to somebody else out there, because once you own it, I think then it's easier to do it after that. And then it comes down to is the right knowledge. And a lot of people out there, they have best intent. I've been doing this for 3 decades, and I'll tell you, 95 to 99% of my patients, if I ask them, do you eat healthy? They all say they eat healthy. And I know they're not lying to me. The problem is they don't know what healthy is. And
Right.
none of us do. Healthy food or health to me is sort of like describing beauty. It's like the eye of the beholder. You can talk to one specialist, they'll tell you exact opposite, and you talk to somebody else, they'll tell you the exact opposite. So if now let's say you have an individual who owns it and really wants to make a change, I think 90% plus, in my opinion, is diet. Exercise, absolutely very, very, very important. And I'm not cutting down exercise. But my point is that exercise, you cannot run away from poor diet, no matter how much you exercise. I've done enough angiograms, enough tests on people on surface exercise are healthy and their arteries are rotting to the core. And I'm not seeing the opposite, people who eat exceptionally healthy to be that way. I think diet is pretty much everything. Uh, Diet and air we breathe in are the two things how our body interacts with outside. And diet, the problem with the diet part is there's a lot of confusion what is healthy. And I'm sure it's happening in India as well. A lot of processed packaged foods. We eat 3 meals a day, and then we have snacks in between. All the vegetable oils, tons of sugar, processed preservatives, emulsifiers, different carcinogenic agents, no fiber, all that hits our gut. And even though when I was training, I want to do cardiology to make impact on heart disease, more I have matured, I've realized I really did not need to become a cardiologist if I wanted to impact because all this stuff is connected. All this stuff is connected. And I passionately feel it all starts in the gut because that is just when air we breathe in, it's the lungs. The food we eat in is our gut. That's where it begins. And you mess up the lining, you mess up the microbiome, you basically start leaking stuff into your bloodstream. If you look at human anatomy, our entire bloodstream from the gut, total system drains into the liver. So all we eat is ultimately filtered through the liver. So liver takes the brunt of it. And hepatic steatosis or fatty liver disease is an epidemic in the US, in India, in all these countries. And metabolic syndrome and whatnot. So what to eat, I feel like I don't even fall into this trap of keto diet or non-keto diet. To me, is the source of the food is the biggest question. What I mean by that is if you eat the way Mother Nature made food, I think most of your problems are going to be solved. The second, it has been processed and it has been touched by mankind, went through some industrialized or some processing plant, you kind of messed it up. So I tend to tell my patients eat more the way Mother Nature made it. And I'm also a big promoter of intermittent fasting because especially people who have metabolic syndrome or have abdominal obesity, visceral obesity, high triglycerides, low HDL, hypertension, diabetes or pre-diabetes, you cannot reverse that problem with high insulin levels in your body. And you cannot lower your insulin levels by having periods where you do not eat. Because if your insulin levels high, high, high all the time, you have breakfast, insulin goes up, is going down, there comes a mid-morning snack, then there comes a lunch, then comes another snack, then there comes a dessert, then there comes dinner. All this stuff, your insulin levels are high, and you can't reverse that until you have prolonged periods where you don't eat. So I think if you do intermittent fasting and you're going to cut down your snacks and you're going to eat more whole foods, you'll solve most of your health problems. And I will also comment on the beverages. That's another thing is the silent killer is the beverages because people don't think that to be as food. So when we're talking about sodas were bad. So industry created diet stuff and the low calorie and low sugar stuff. The beer is bad. Now you have 0 calorie beer. You have all these coffee shops with sweeteners and lattes and juices and all this stuff. Our 60% of our body is made out of water. It's not made out of Starbucks. It's not made out of whichever favorite beer you drink or whichever. And wine got so much publicity. Wine is so good for the heart. I think all this stuff is really, really bad for you. Drinking water, maybe some tea, maybe some black coffee. And I think that's what people follow. I think they'll take care of themselves a lot better.
Absolutely. It's it's what we put in our body that causes the problem. And the fasting, you wrote the beautiful newsletter on fasting, which came a couple of days back. So I put Dr. Garg's website in the comments. Please go and subscribe to his newsletter. You'll find so much information, so much practical advice. And coming to some practical tips, doctor, if you want to give some practical tips on what to eat, how to exercise, which are good for busy people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say, is I usually say to my patients that if you figure out why you need to do something, how is easy. What I usually see patients is they get lost in the how part. How am I going to do it? I'm too busy, my work, this and that. And I usually say, if I'm a non-smoker, it doesn't matter how much stress I have. I'm not going to go out there and light up a cigarette, right? So you have to create boundaries around you. This is who I am. That should not change. So if you know why I need to do this for myself or my kids or whatever that might be. If you figure out the why, the lighthouse that's going to guide you, how part is easy.
Right.
But most of the people don't figure out why they need to do it. They get lost in the how this and how that, and they get lost in that shuffle. So I usually tell them, getting in the right bus first. What seat you're going to sit on, we can figure that out later. You just get out of this bus, get on this bus first. Don't get lost in should I eat organic, should I eat non-organic, which fruit is good, which fruit is bad. Just the fact that you get into the bus first and you put the junk food, you put the alcohol, you get all the sweeteners and this and that, and you just get over there first. And then later on, you can figure out you're going to be in the front of the bus, in the middle of the bus, or the back of the bus. You can talk about the details. So I think just figuring out, making that as a light post that that's what I want to do and that's what I'm going to be. And as I said, food is the biggest addiction. We all know alcohol is bad. We all know drugs are bad. We all know smoking is bad. We have, as a society, accepted that. But the food addiction problem is that we don't recognize food addiction as an addiction. Number two, you can walk away from cigarettes and never have to touch it because you really don't need cigarettes to live. Food is not, you can't say, I'm not going to eat anymore. So food is one of those addictions you cannot walk away. You have to be attached to it, and still you have to stay away from it. And that's my point earlier I made. You have to draw boundaries around you. This stuff I do not do, period. It doesn't matter if it's Diwali or if it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, or I'm on a cruise or I'm on a vacation. This is who you are, and just wait, you don't smoke when you're on a cruise because you're a non-smoker. So to me, it may sound very strict, but I think the food, it's just, you can imagine any addict, it will suck you back in. The second you may be good for 5 days, you may be good for a month, you let it go for a week, you're going to be sucked right back in. And that's why I ask patients, how do you move a mountain? You can't pick it up and move it there. You got to rock at a time. So when you do rock at a time for 5, 6 days, and then you bring truckloads back, you're working on the same rocks 6 months later. And now you're tired and fatigued. You say it's not working. It's not working. It's just now you bringing this working in the same rocks. So I think making incremental improvements and never going back, I think consistency is the key. It's just like forming any habit. To make a habit, first you have to have knowledge, skill, and attitude. Attitude to me is sort of that's the click right here. You say, I'm going to do it. This is it. I'm done. I think that is, to me, is the defining moment where you commit to it, to that goal. And then you chunk it up into small, small pieces. You don't make it like, I'm going to go from here to there. You take the lowest hanging fruit. If you drink alcohol, you say, you know what? I am done with alcohol for now. You never touch it again. Week, 10 days, whatever that might be. Okay, I'm done with whatever my favorite desserts are. I'm done with my junk food, whatever that might be. So just in a month, you do that, you have, and you never go back, you're going to see huge improvement in yourself. And now you got a snowball effect because you start seeing these changes. And habits are like compounding in finances, right? In the beginning, you can be the compound interest. If you see the slope, it's very flat, and then it just takes off. And nobody wants to get to that point where you see the exponential growth in your health because they all want quick results. We have become a mindset of society that we want the results now. We are so attached to the goals and the results. I would say we need to be more attached to the process. The results are just the side effects they will follow. So if you do the right thing day in, day out, with head down every single day, you'll see the results. And once you start seeing the results, then it's become exponential and the changes you see.
This is amazing. This is such solid advice. Really appreciate that, Dr. Garg.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Dave, you want to take the next section, please?
Yeah. So let's get back to some technical stuff again. So there is a misconception that saturated fats are harmful, right? Even among the medical community. And this clearly doesn't align with evolutionary science. We know that human species evolved consuming a lot of saturated fats. So why do you think this misinformation persists even among growing evidences?
So evidence, I think, might be, Dev, I would say a little bit of a strong word, but I would say is that uh, you have to see our ancestors, when they had a lot of saturated fat, they didn't have junk food. They didn't have inflammatory foods as I was commenting on earlier, cholesterol and saturated fat may be left at the plaque, but the damage is really done by inflammation stuff, the other stuff that we eat. So I think that eating high saturated fat diet be okay. But if that is in combination with inflammatory foods, it's going to come back and bite you. Number two, I don't know about in India and other countries, but at least in the United States, most of the meat industry is sort of like production line in a car assembly line. Animals are given same processed food that we say we should not be eating ourselves. Soy products and corn products and antibiotics and hormones, from chicken to beef to every single thing. Even the fish industry, a lot of fish industry is farmed fish. So people are eating all this stuff thinking it's going to give them omega-3 fatty acids. But guess what? Not, because they're getting same processed stuff that, so these animals are getting same diseases of metabolic syndrome. So on surface, you may be saying, I'm eating no carbs, I'm eating high fat diet. But guess, no, you're still hurting yourself because they have the same diseases that you are trying to avoid by not opening a can of chips. So that goes back to what I said earlier. Source to me is more important than what you eat. So if you're going to eat that kind of stuff, you better make sure the source is correct. And most of out there is not. People don't pay attention to that. So to me, the fight or the misconception is not really between saturated or non-saturated. Just being aware is the combination of both. Saturated fat in the setting of inflammatory foods is a problem.
Right. But at least among the medical community, there's like a hard line against saturated fats. That saturated fats are bad, definitely bad.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll answer. That's what I said earlier. The education given to the doctors and a medical student is sort of like it's like a law of physics. Heart disease, LDL. Heart disease, LDL. That's in everybody's doctors in their DNA. It's been pumped into them from basic education. And even now, doctors out in practice. Our in cardiology boards example, you take cardiology boards every 10 years. It's the same thing. You go to medical meetings, it's the same thing. It's those pills and the idea of cholesterol. We get minimal training about prevention. We get minimal training about looking at from a more 30,000-foot level, the combination of risk factors, how connectivity of all that, how that leads to heart disease. Nobody has ever really looked at that. We treat each, it's sort of like six blind men explaining the elephant. Cardiologist sees this, they do their thing. GI doctor sees a leaky gut, they do their thing. Endocrinologist sees diabetes, they do their thing. So everybody's prescribing pills, but the elephant in the room is the entire problem. And nobody looks at that. And how you connect that to me is the diet thing. And there is very, very minimal, any uh, impetus on anybody's part to really talk about that or even bring that in the forefront. And as I commented on earlier, most of the doctors, it's sort of like a knee-jerk reflex. LDL 120 or 140 or 170, there's a statin. And there is very little discussion about what other components, what other things you could do to help yourself. Because it's an easy thing to do. It's less time consuming and it's easy thing to do for everybody.
So, follow-up question is about statins. You touched upon this a little bit earlier. So, there's some evidence that suggests that statins have a lot of side effects, from muscle pain to insulin resistance to cognitive issues like Alzheimer's and dementia, etc. So, are statins even worth it? Like, that's the question I personally get a lot. Kunal also gets it from his clients. So, what do you think?
So, so far the push in medical community has been very low threshold for using statins. I I tend to believe the threshold should be very high to use threshold to use statin. And what my point is going back to what I said earlier is it really depends in what setting you're using statins. Somebody, to me, the first thing is always got to be the diet. But practically, I'll tell you, it's very difficult for people to change their diet. Most of them don't do it. So if somebody has heart disease, has bypass surgery, have had stents put in, the LDL is 140, 150, 170, you have no choice. The best data you have is statins if they're not going to change their lifestyle. Would I recommend statin in somebody who's a 40-year-old with no risk factors? Absolutely not. So statin, you have to really see in what circumstance you use and what are the resources you have really utilized to get to your goal. And many times at the end of the day, people don't have any other option, especially with people, the high risk population is a cardiologist that I see, because if they're not going to change their lifestyle, that's all they have. Now, as a comment about dementia and whatnot, if we forget about statin for a second, the metabolic syndrome and diabetes and leaky gut, that also leads to dementia. So if people are really worried about that, then I would say change your diet. There is no argument in my mind. Absolutely. Don't take statin. When my patients say I don't want to take a statin, I never push them. I never even say a second time to them to take a statin. I just tell them then onus and the entire burden is on you. I'll guide you. I'll be a coach. I'll help you how to get there. But that means if you're so against statin, that's great. But then you got to do the second part. The argument is not should I take statin or not. The argument is the goal. The goal is to lower your cardiovascular risk. Statin is just a one tiny tool. If you don't want to do that, let's work on the other one.
All right. Kunal, do we take up? There are a few audience questions. Do we take them up?
Right? Or we just have the last section. Maybe we'll finish that and
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, sure.
So,
Go ahead.
so we want to just talk about some long-term solutions, starting with what are your biggest challenges in educating your patients in terms of heart health and the lifestyle changes they need to make. What kind of challenges you come across?
I think my biggest challenge is, for lack of any better answer, is time or lack thereof. I think my biggest challenge there. I find myself many times getting so late in my seeing my next patient. The next patient is because I get too involved talking to patients about lifestyle. I think that to me is the biggest limitation. But even if I do that, the second part is lack of follow through. What I mean by that is I may see a patient, I may talk to them, I may not see them for another 6 months. But that me talking for an hour may not have that residual effect on them a week later or a month later. So the success rate kind of gets smaller and smaller. So I think that is to me is the biggest challenge is the time constraints that I have. So I think that's why continuous feedback loop, continuous structure is very important for somebody, at least in the very beginning phases for weeks to months, till they have done something frequent enough that it's become a habit. And the first part is very, very important. And I think that's the failure I see. Somebody has sudden cardiac death, they saved their life, they had a heart attack, you get a stent in. And that is when people have the most amount of motivation because they just had a very traumatic experience. But the issue and the problem is that there is no support structure thereafter how to use that energy to keep them on a positive side of things. The second challenge I face is that you are one tiny voice in a very loud room. A loud room, what I mean is we are inundated with so much bad information, whether it's online, whether it's television, whether the coworkers and friends, and you go to the grocery stores, you look to the sporting events. There is so much bad information out there. You're fighting a very loud crowd, so that makes it very difficult for patients, for public, and for some of us who really want to help people. I
Absolutely.
think that's why yeah, inner conviction by the subjects who want to be healthy is absolutely the key. Because ultimately, as I said earlier, your financial health and wealth is your personal responsibility. Nobody's going to make you rich. You got to invest. You got to put nickels and dimes every single day in the piggy bank if you want to see a big chunk of change 2, 3, 4 decades from now. And that's how health is. You got to do every small decision you make at the dinner table or when you go shopping is the key. If you go to the lunchroom to get a glass of water, there is a apple and there is a cookie. That one tiny decision is not going to kill me. Trust me, it is going to kill you, because what that is telling you is you just don't have that conviction that you
A-
picked a cookie.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for the people who are still sitting on the fence, wondering whether they should make the lifestyle change or continue with the medications, do you want to share any success story which will probably motivate them to choose the lifestyle path? Any
Oh my
anyone?
gosh. I mean, yeah, there's so many. I mean, to me, I'll tell you, it's almost raises hair on my back when I see these people. uh, I've seen people, coming back to my office 6 months later, a year later. They literally feel so energetic and good. I've had patients can't even sit on the chair during the visit. They're almost beating their chest like they climb Mount Everest. And it literally is. It is really climbing Mount Everest to be able to change your lifestyle, come off the diabetic pills, and feel so good about it. You're not using CPAP machine for sleep apnea. You're not taking blood pressure medicine. To me, there is nothing more satisfying as a doctor and for people to be able to do that. I mean, I just saw a guy last week. His last stent was done in 2012. This is 12 years later, and he's like 80 something year old now, and he eats healthy, exercise. It's just magical. Then I saw another lady last week. She's 57. She had her first stent put at 34. She has had 4 or 5 stents put in. She had leg bypass surgery from vascular disease, diabetic, central obesity, high cholesterol, insulin, still smokes. And she told me she has no plans to quit smoking. And it's just heartbreaking when you see that. Like, you see what's coming, but there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. And the last question is, how would you like to fortify this message that people have to themselves keep bigger and find long-term solutions for these chronic health issues?
Yeah, I mean, I would say is seek the right knowledge. I think knowledge, information age is very cheap, but the problem is the illusion of knowledge is worse than no knowledge. What I mean by that is if I know nothing about it, I may go out there and search for it. But if I think I know, but I am equipped with very bad knowledge, I'm not going to go search. And I see a lot of people think they know it, but they are unfortunately stuck with the wrong knowledge. And I will always say, challenge anything, everything, even what I'm saying, challenge it, and listen to different opinions, develop a gut feel for it, test it, retest it, and see what's worked. Because at the end of the day, the results is what's never going to lie to you, right? It's the results at the end of the day that matters. So results are not going to lie. And believing in something, trying it, and failing and trying it again. And the biggest part is really not going back, always making progress. The worst thing you want to do is make progress and then go back. Then it's not worth it. You you have to continue. You can't sacrifice so much and then give all that back again, because that's what diet plans do. And you don't want to see this as a diet plan. You want to see this as a lifestyle. This is who I am, and this is what I'm going to become, and end of discussion. And also is, I find people struggling is they think that something is being taken away from them, that I cannot have a dessert. If you have that mindset, it's not going to last long enough. For example, to me, I don't eat desserts. So dessert or cookie or whatever, a cake, it's not even food to me because my brain does not even connect with that as a food. So I don't miss it. It's like as a giving example of smoker or non-smoker, right? So if I don't smoke, no matter how stressed, how much bored I am, it's smoking does not exist in my universe. So you have to get to that point, and you only get to the point by doing consistently and doing this day in, day out and making these small changes, and you never look back. And if you cheat back and forth, it's just a matter of time. You're going to go to the dark side.
Absolutely. So I think let's look at the audience questions in the chat section. The first question is from Mr. Jaypal Reddy. He's asking about C-reactive protein and lipoprotein for heart disease. I think he wants to know about the tests. You've already spoken about that. You want to just give?
Yeah, CRP is a marker of inflammation. If anybody checks it, again, if you already have established heart disease, there's no point. So this is just for primary prevention, I would say. Primary prevention means you don't have any heart disease. You don't even know nothing about it. You're just curious. And what is my risk? Again, not CRP alone is not going to help you. It's in a combination of other things, right? So it's just a marker of inflammation. But I will also say it should not be checked when you're sick with something. So you have a cold or something, your CRP levels are going to be high. You had a bad tooth, your CRP levels are going to be high. So that's not when you want to check. So if you're going to check CRP, you're feeling pretty good, that's when you check CRP levels. LP little a is a very good predictor of heart disease. And it is not really the standard we check that often, but again, the treatment or the prevention part is sort of the same, doing the right thing. So I don't get bogged down by doing too many tests. To me, the simple test, what you do, like triglyceride, HDL, and just listening to somebody's story and abdominal obesity and all this stuff, I think that pretty much tells you the story. After that, it's just the accumulation of evidence, which we already know. So it's better to just, now you know, start working on it.
So the next question is from Prema, and she says, "Hi, Dr. Sandeep. My name is Prema from Malaysia, and I am a final year master's student in clinical exercise physiology with a background in sports science and rehabilitation. I would like to know your perspective on the role of professionals like me in the healthcare field. In Malaysia, clinical exercise physiologists are not yet recognized by the Ministry of Health, and only doctors and/or physiotherapists are acknowledged for providing exercise consultation and prescription. What are your thoughts on this?"
No, exercise is absolutely very, very important. There is no doubt about that. Actually, in the United States, after a heart attack and all, people join cardiac rehab. And one of the things that really helps them get back is the psychological part. Because after they have a heart attack, they have this fear of exercising. They have fear of going out there. I think even with heart failure. So all these people with heart disease, the rehab or something in a structured exercise program is physically very good for them and also psychologically. But the gap I see is consistently is what happens after that, 2, 3 months of rehab. And most of the people don't follow through on that. And I think having some structure where they can follow through on that, I think you get a much bigger return. Um, and also in a structured exercise program, what I usually, and at least in my local community, I notice is that the missing link is many times the diet part. The focus is mostly on the exercise, and they don't focus too much on the diet part and what to eat, what not to eat. It's sort of more like a generic guidelines, like do in moderation, that kind of stuff. But as for somebody to exercise, when patients ask me, what should I exercise? And I say the same thing to them is, it depends on several factors: your physical limitations, your personal choices, where you live, what resources are available to you. For example, Some people can only walk, or some people can't even walk because they're bad arthritis. Maybe they can do swimming or water aerobics, or maybe they have a gym or equipment at home, or maybe they have a stationary bike, or maybe they don't. They can. The point of exercise really is to do something where you feel you got to work out. If you're already in a good shape, try to push yourself, add some resistance training, add some weights. But if you have never exercised before, just go out there and start walking. If you can only walk half a kilometer or half a mile, do half a mile. Maybe after a week, you'll be doing a little bit more. And maybe 3 months later, you're running and walking. Add some more stuff to it, whether it's stationary bike or biking outside. So I think it's just the keeping your body moving. And I think the location where you move also has a huge impact. If you go out in the trails and the nature, I think has is so much better than just walking. But again, that depends on resources where you live. I don't know if that answers her question or not.
So the next one is more of a comment. Sonia says that in Muscat, getting blood tests done is not easy, and also getting supplements is a challenge. So it's like a localized issue where people face. I think in the UK also some tests are not very accessible. So it's like difficult. Then there's another question from Mr. Himanshu Agarwal. Asks, what are the suggestions to improve HDL for person having a cardiac history and who's now on a low carb diet?
So the first question, to answer that, I think that limitation exists even in US. You have to get doctors to order particular tests. But again, it depends on how badly you need to do the order. I think the key is just do the right thing. Even if you cannot get a blood test, it's not going to hurt you to just do all the right stuff. Whether your CRP level is a little high or normal, practically it's irrelevant. But if it's an intellectual curiosity, then you can maybe go somewhere else or whatever that might be. But my point is that what's the easy, simple thing to do is just do it. What needs to be done, regardless of the blood test. That would be my first answer. I'm sorry, you asked me a second question. What was that?
The second question is a specific one to a person who wants to improve the HDL
Yeah,
levels.
HDL. Yeah. So low HDL levels are usually in conjunction with high triglycerides. And genetically also there is a component. I think in India and Southeast Asia, HDL tends to be lower. And it's usually associated with high triglycerides, which is usually a marker of visceral obesity. Visceral obesity means fat within the belly, not outside, within the belly, around the organs, around the gut, around the pancreas, and also fat in the liver itself. So 1 or 2 pounds of fat in the liver. On the scale, you're not going to pick it up. 5 to 8 pounds of fat in the belly. So you're 8, 9, 10 pounds overweight. Pounds means in kilograms is like 4 or 5 kilos. It's not going to really hit anybody's alarm. But the problem is that is exactly what's is the killer. It's not the subcutaneous fat that you see outside necessarily. It's the visceral fat is the problem. So HDL low, high triglyceride is a pretty good warning sign to me. How do you lower it? I alluded to that earlier. Is really cutting down. That's a sign of insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is mostly a sign of a lot of sugar spikes. So cutting down your sugars, so not letting it spike up, and intermittent fasting. So you have periods where your glucose levels are low, your insulin is low, you're producing more ketones. And also I will add is eating tons of fiber, because what fiber does is, so even let's say you do intermittent fasting, you have not eaten anything for 16, 18 hours or whatever. And the very first thing you're going to eat is drink juice or something that has a lot of sugar in it on empty stomach, you're going to have huge glucose spike, huge glucose spike. So what you want to do is eat a lot of fiber. Eat your fruit, don't drink it. Eat your vegetables, don't drink it. Because if you're eating an orange, after one orange, you will feel satisfied. If you're going to put orange in a blender, you're probably going to need 3 to 4 oranges just to make one glass. And that fiber is all pulverized. So how to raise HDL? I will say cutting down carbs, really paying attention to how minimizing your body fat, intermittent fasting, and exercising. aerobic and anaerobic resistance training.
So, we see this, like you rightly mentioned, we see this genetically, we see Indians having a very low HDL, partly because of whatever the insulin resistance and partly because of the genetic thing. And we see this more commonly among vegetarians too. I presume it's because they don't consume a lot of healthy fats also. So that is a
Yeah,
factor, I believe.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that's the in India, I was just reading a few days ago, just in preparation for this, because I have not been, I'm not too used to Indian demographics and the numbers. But it was pretty fascinating for me to see that in India, obesity rates in women is around 10% roughly, and in men is only 5%. In US is about 30% plus. But interestingly, the heart disease in India is as common or even more than in the United States. And that gets to tell you it's not the obesity, it's not the body mass index. It is the distribution of the fat because in India, you may not be obese by the scale, but most of your fat is visceral fat and it's liver fat. And so you have bigger belly, but you don't may not be significantly, your body mass index may not be extremely high. I think that is the key. And that's why in India, you see a lot of low HDL and high triglycerides, and a lot of pre-diabetes and a lot of diabetes. And it's driven by, because on surface, people think they're vegetarian, but there's a lot of vegetable oils, a lot of simple carbs, a lot of desserts, and very minimal fiber. I think avoiding that is absolutely the key to reverse most of this.
Absolutely. And just the second part of this question on how to raise your HDL, and this is for if some person has had a cardiac history and is currently on a low carb diet now, what would be the suggestion to raise the HDL in such a case?
So I'm not doubting this person, but I would say it's just I would just caution, make sure it's really low carb, uh, because it's really very difficult to be eating perfect diet. So intermittent fasting, I commented on. I think exercise is very good. The goal should be is really lean muscle mass. That is really the objective, right? So lean muscle mass, how you get there, and rest of the stuff is the process to get there. So lean muscle mass will be more exercising, more resistance training, and really eating lots of fiber and intermittent fasting. It's not just about low carbs. You can have low carb diet, same food 7 times a day. It's not going to have same impact having same food only once a day, for example, because when you're hitting it again and again, you're still having insulin spikes. You are going to still continue to have insulin resistance. So it's not just what you eat, how you eat matters a lot, absolutely a lot. So I can eat the same thing 7, 8 times a day. It's not going to be as effective as me eating over a time restricted feeding over a small time frame.
Right. I think those were the all the questions in the chat. If anyone wants to unmute their mic and ask a question directly, please go ahead. And just a time check, Doctor, we are about 70 minutes in. So how much time do we have just to take up a few
I
more
can have
questions?
as much time. It's Sunday. I have not. I can do it as long as you need it. I'm totally good.
Great. Because I'm sure Dave and I have a few questions as well as the audience. So I'll go with mine first. What is
Okay.
your thoughts on? We see like in Indians, there are a lot of deficiencies: vitamin D, vitamin B12, magnesium is deficient all over. So, what are your thoughts on supplementation, which is now a big industry, and usually people are recommended supplementation, whether it's from doctors, nutritionists, or health influencers. What is your take on supplements?
I think I was mentioning earlier a little bit. I think supplements is another thing. It just the pendulum swinging the other way. People looking, they don't buy into the pharmaceutical part of the medicine, so they go. And I
Right.
see that many times people saying, I don't want to treat my cholesterol artificially. I want some natural reads. And what does that mean? They take supplements. So I ask them usually, how is a supplement natural?
No
We were
worries.
talking about this. We were talking about this supplement. So I think there there is a role of supplements, but I want to clarify my position on that because I don't like to take, these blanket statements that good or they're bad. I think it all depends on trade-offs. Uh, One of the biggest flaws I see, I mean, supplement industry, I think the US is about 200 to $240 billion per year. And it's a huge industry, no doubt about that. And I think people fall prey from one to the other. On one side, I totally get the sentiment. They don't belong to they don't believe in the pharmaceutical part. And so the pendulum swings to the other side. I want to do by natural means. The problem with natural means is that a lot of my patients say that, I take these natural supplements and I tell them there's nothing natural about it. They come in artificially in a bottle in a pill format. They're non-prescription medications. That's what they are. So people take turmeric pills, people take fiber pills, they have antioxidant pills. There's so many different pills. And I personally, most of them, I don't believe in them. And then the quality is another problem. People take fish oil. I hear that a lot of fish oils that are out there they're made from the fish that have been farmed fish. So they don't even have omega-3 fatty acids. They have mostly omega-6 and other pollutants in it. So I'm a big believer going back to the source of food that I said earlier. If I want supplements, why not just go out there? If I want antioxidants, eat blueberries and raspberries and eat green vegetables, and you get all the supplements that you need. Of course, there are some supplements, depending on what individual's particular diet we are deficient in. We suffer with a lot of vitamin D deficiency in the US also, especially in the Northern Hemisphere because of lack of sun, especially where I live. So I think vitamin D is very important. Yeah, so I was saying, I think supplements, to me, there are some supplements that are probably necessary. Vitamin D is one of them. And I think, again, if somebody is going to get any supplement, I think quality is very important. A lot of fish oils, as I commented on earlier, are really not a good source of omega-3 because it's made from farm fish. If you are going to get a supplement, go to the right source. If you want antioxidants, have a lot of vegetables and have a lot of healthy berries and whatnot. If you want fiber, eat fibrous food. You don't need to get a fiber pill. That's how I personally look at it. Um, I think vitamin B12 deficiency is a problem, especially in people who are completely vegetarian. I think that's important, and I think to make sure it's a good quality. Don't necessarily go to the cheapest one possible, because I think the supplement industry is not as well, manufacturing process is not as well regulated as compared to other stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just in case uh, the network drops off, we want to thank you in advance for giving us your precious time and gracing our podcast and sharing so much knowledge in such a beautiful manner. We really want to thank Dave. You want to give
Yeah,
a word
thank
of
you, Doc.
thanks?
It was a fantastic session. So much insightful. And we surely want to have you another time to discuss more topics.
No, absolutely. I really enjoyed it too, and I think this totally meets my personal individual goal as well. So no, I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Garg, for sharing such valuable insights on today's episode of Healthy X Sundays. For more from Dr. Garg, be sure to follow him on social media. Links are in the description. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't miss next week's episode, where we'll be joined by another exciting guest. Until then, stay healthy, stay happy, and take care.